All right, Shabbos, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsor for the month of Teves, Mrs. Selma Wolf, for dedicating all the Shir and Drushos this month with immense gratitude for the refuah from HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the merit of a refuah shlimun for all of those in need, and in the schus of our brave soldiers, and for the schus of the return of our hostages. To thank Leah Sol for dedicating all the Shir Drushos this month as a schus for refuah shlimun for her daughter Ilana Bas Esther, for the safety of our soldiers and for the safe return of all of the hostages to their family. We dedicate our learning Le'ili Nishmas, our precious soldiers who fell in battle yesterday. Captain Shaul Gringlick, Major Shai Shamriz, and Major Maor Lavi. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, their neshamas will have an aliyah and their families a nechama. And of course, we dedicate all of Mesechas Baba Kama Le'ilui Nishmas, Master Sergeant Yomi Chol Charush Hashem Yikom Damo. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, his neshama will have an aliyah and his family in nechama. We will say with that, let us begin. We have a beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Nun Hey 55, and we are picking up on Nun Daled Amud Beis 54b, 14 lines up from the bottom. We actually ended off a little bit later, but let's just pick up from here again because it's a good jumping off point. So the Gemara says, "V'chol heicha the kasev rachmana kol ribuyahu." Now the Gemara, remember again, we're having an entire discussion about the drashas concerning certain psukim. So the Gemara says, in reality, do we say that wherever the Torah uses the word kol, that kol is always a riboy? After all, the hari v'ha kavi meiser. What about by meiser sheni? But remember again, we already began this discussion yesterday. Remember, meiser sheni is the second tithe that ultimately, again, is your property to eat, right? It's not really your property, but it's yours to consume, with the caveat that you have to consume it in Yerushalayim. So remember again, if Baruch Hashem, one has, quote unquote, too much Meiser Sheni to be able to transport to Yerushalayim, what can you do? Redeem it with money, take the money to Yerushalayim, and use the money for food. So the Gemara says as follows. What about Meiser Sheni? The Chsiv, Kol, the Kadarshina Lebechal Uprat. The Rabbi say by Meiser Sheni we're going to see the Torah uses the word Kol, but we don't darshan Kol as a ribui, we darshan Kol as a Klal Uprat. This Sanya, we learned in the Reisa. V'nasata Keseh Bechal Shetava Nefshecha. So remember again, the pasuk says, "You shall use the money for whatever your heart desires." Klal. Now that is a general statement, right? Because Torah is telling you, use the money for whatever you want. Then, babakar ubatson bayayin ubashechar. Then it says again, use it for meat, for cattle, for sheep, for wine, for intoxicating beverages. Prat. That's a specific statement. The Gemara says, "Ubechol asher tishalcha nafshecha," for whatever your heart desires. Chazar v'kalal. That's another klal. So what do we have over here? Klal uprat uklal. Fine. So we'll say, what's the halacha, or what's the manner in which a klal uprat uklal is darshaned? Iyatadan elakena prat. So we'll say, remember here, the way a klal uprat works is like this. The prat kind of provides the framework with which to darshan the klal. So what's unique about the prat in this case? So the Gemara says, "Ma prat mafurash primi privi gidulei karka." I will say now the prat bakar tzon yayin shechar are primi pri, all things that come from other things. In other words, they're birthed. So yayin and shechar ultimately again are birthed from the ground. Bakar ultimately bakar and son have a human mother. Furthermore, again, Gidulei karka, they all grow from the ground. Either literally grow from the ground or nourished from the ground. Afkol primi pri gidulei karka. So too, therefore, what can you use your Meiser Sheni money for? Anything that fits into the framework of primi pri and gidulei karka. So I'll say, so the point over here is, you see that what? You see that kol is not looked at as a ribui, but rather kol is often used as part of a klalu pratu klal. So what's going on over here? Amri, bakol or bichol, klalahu, kol ribuya. So Mar says, you're right. The truth is, it depends. The word ultimately, again, bakol or bichol, ultimately is used as a ribui. Just the opposite. Bakol is used for a klal upratu klal, and ultimately, again, kol is a ribui. So in other words, the Gemara is just talking about different words. Different words used different ways. The other possibility is Kol nami klalahu. The word kol is also used in the klal. Mihu hai kol dahacha ribuyahu. So we'll say it could very well be that normally kol is used ultimately. I'm sorry. Kol nami klalahu. Kol is used as kol is used as a klal in the form of a klalu pratu klal, but over here this kol is different. It's a riboy. Why? Since the Torah could have just said ubehemtecha instead of shar v'chamar, kedichsiv bedibros harishonos, as it says in the first set of dibros, because of v'chol behemtecha, and instead it says v'chol behemtecha, shma mina ribuya. Therefore, we'll say again it's an extraneous word. Therefore, it must be used as a riboy. So the Gemara says hashta da amrit kol ribuyahu. Now that you're telling me that kol is a riboy, behemtecha de dibros harishonos, v'shar v'chamor de dibros ha'achronos lamali. So if that's the case, then why do I need behemtecha in the first set of dibros and shar and chamor in the second set of dibros? Amri, shar la'agmure, shar la'chasima. So we'll say this goes back to yesterday's daf. I need shar, ultimately, so they can provide for the gzera shava of shar by muzzling. Chamar la'agmure, chamar leprika. And I need chamar to teach you the gzera shava, ultimately, again, for the obligation to unload an overburdened animal. Behemtecha, la'agmure behemtecha l'kilayim, and the word behemtecha ultimately comes teach me the gzera shava of behemtecha for kilayim. Ihaki, if that's the case, afilu adam litzar. If that's the case, then you should include adam. In other words, I will say, what about the prohibition to, let's say, remember again, the law of kilayim says you cannot hitch two animals of different species to the same yoke to plow a field. So maybe you should include adam. Should include Adam. Rashi says over here, Adam nami lissar, limshoch bekaron in behema, dahag gabi Shabbos musar ke behema. Rashi says, so maybe ultimately, since we're learning out the prohibition of kilayim from Shabbos, so we should say that just like a person is obligated in Shabbos, so to a person you can't hitch a person and an animal to the same yoke. Why did we learn Adam mutar im kulam lachrosh v'limshach? Yet Rabbi said we know that the halacha of kilayim, right, of going ahead and plowing a field with two different species doesn't apply to people. In other words, technically speaking, if a person, right, Ruvain wants to help out with the plowing, so Shimon hitches him to the yoke together with an ox, that's not kilayim. To which the Gemara says, Amra Papa, Papunoi Yoda Taima de Hamilsa. Right? So Papa says, the Papunoi know the reason for this halacha. Umanu Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, Amrakra, Leman Yanuach Avdecha Va'amascha Kamocha. So the pasuk says, your servant and your maidservant shall rest on Shabbos like you. Lahanocha hikashtiv v'lo davar achar. We compare ultimately again an eved and an amal to the animal when it comes to what I will say, when it comes ultimately again to resting, but not for other things. In other words, that other halachas that apply to animals will not apply to people. So therefore, for example, halacha l'maisa, the halacha of kilayim, which says that you can't plow with two different species together, that dafka applies ultimately again to animals and not to other things. Rashi says, La nachik shasiv, Eved va'amal behema, avalo le'inyan isra achar. So we compare ultimately again the eved and the ama to an animal for resting purposes, that they are all obligated to rest on Shabbos, but we do not compare them for other purposes. Okay, beautiful. So we'll say now some really, really special Gemara to end off this chapter, this parak. Shal Rabbi Chanina ben Agil es Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Mipnei ma b'dibros harishonos lo. So now, by the way, just because the Gemara mentioned Dibros Rishonos, Dibros Achronos, right? Again, specifically that the commandment of Shabbos in both Dibros, in both sets of commandments, that kind of sets the stage for the Gemara that is coming ahead of us over here. So Shar Rabbi Chanina ben Agil is Rabbi Chia bar Abba. So Rabbi Chanina ben Agil asked the following question of Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Mipnei ma b'dibros harishonos lo ne'emar bahem tov, u'b'dibros ha'achronos ne'emar bahem tov. So I will say, so here was the following question. Why is it that in the first set of commandments, the Torah doesn't use the word tov, and in the second set of commandments, top of Nun Hey, 55a, the Torah does use the word tov? Now, I will say, what are we talking about over here? Take a look at the top Rashi on Nun Hey with Aleph 55a. Rashi says, Nemar bahen tov, gabe kibud av va'im dichsiv bahem leman yitav lach. So I will say, this is interesting. By the first set of commandments, the Torah says, honor your parents. Okay. In the second set of commandments, the Torah says, same commandment, but adds in the phrase, it should be good for you. So it doesn't say that in the first set of commandments. So why is that? Why is that? Why is there no tov by the first set of dibros, and yes tov, or included tov, the benefit, the good that comes by honoring your parents, why does that come in the second set of commandments? So remember again, this is Rabbi Chanina asking Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia responds, which is a very strange response. Amar Ad sha'ata sho'alani lama ne'amar bahen tov. Before you ask me why it says tov, sha'alani im ne'amar bahen tov. Why don't you instead ask me if it says tov? Now I will say, what's very imlav, right? She'ini yodeya im ne'amar bahen tov imlav. Because here's what's interesting. So Rabbi Chanina is asking why. Rabbi Chia says, well, before you ask me why, ask me for sure if that's correct. Is there tov in the second one and not tov in the first one? Then I will say, now that's strange, because remember again, Rabbi Chia is a Talmud Chacham. The assumption is a Talmud Chacham, ultimately, if there's one thing a Talmud Chacham knows, it's what? It's Chumash. And I will say, it's a beautiful Rashi. Rashi brings down, Rashi quotes the Gemara. Rashi says, Makala miskashetes b'chav talad kishutin, just like a kala used to adorn herself with 24 different ornaments. Ultimately, again, kach Talmud Chacham tzarich liskashet es atzmo b'chav daled sifrei Tanakh. A Talmud Chacham has to adorn himself with the 24 books of Tanakh. I remember I learned this lesson in a very dramatic way. I was learning in yeshiva, and we were doing that year. This is already in Smicha. We were doing Maseches Chulin, and I had a Rebbe, Rav Reuven Katz, who was one of my favorite Rebbeim. He was a European Rav. He received Smicha from Isser Zalman Meltzer. So just like to show you, like old school. So I remember one time we were learning Chulin, so we get up to the pasuk, V'kara l'cha v'achalta misivcho. Pasuk says, talking about Shechita. He called him, he said, Silber, where's the pasuk? He wanted like chapter and verse. I'm a product of the yeshiva system. I can't quote you chapter and verse. I don't know Chumash. So it was Musar in front of the entire shir. with love. A good Musar. Again, he said, how can you ever expect to know Tanakh? How can you ever expect to be a Talmud Chacham if you don't know Tanakh? He said, and quoted that Rashi, quoted it like 3 times, over and over, like in a sing-song. Makalim is kashetas b'chav talad kishutin, kach tam tracham tzarech lis kashet b'chav talad sifrei Tanakh. It's an interesting thing in our educational system. In Eretz Yisrael, you find this much more, that there is an emphasis on learning Tanakh, knowing Tanakh, mastering Tanakh, and then moving on to other bodies of knowledge. Everything is based on Tanakh, in that event. So my point over here is, it's interesting that Rabbi Chia says, before you ask me why, how do you know for sure that there's tov? So we'll say Rabbi Chia didn't know the pasuk. We'll see exactly what the nature of the question was in just a moment. Watch this. The Gemara says as follows: Kilecha eitzel Rabbi Tanchum ben Chaniloi. Instead, why don't you go to Rabbi Tanchum bar Chaniloi? Shaya ragil eitz Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Shaya baki ba'agada. So Rabbi Chia says, listen, I don't know the answer, but why don't you go to Rabbi Tanchum, who was a Talmud of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. And Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi could go ahead and Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi might have taught him something over the years. Here's the Baki Nagada. Azal Lagabe. So Rabbi Chanina goes to Rabbi Tanchum. So Amar le mimenu lo shamati. So Rabbi Tanchum says, listen, I never heard anything about this from Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, right? But Elakach Amar li Shmuel bar Nachum, Achi imo shel Rav Acha b'Rabbi Chanina. But here's what I heard from Shmuel, the son of Nachum, right? The brother of the mother of Rabbi Acha, Rabbi Chanina, right? The Amrila Avi imo Shrabi Chanina. Avi imo Shrabi Achi Rabbi Chanina. Others say, ultimately again, he was the father of the mother of Rabbi Achi Rabbi Chanina. Okay, so here's what I heard from this man Shmuel Bar Nachum. Right, Shmuel Bar Nachum. Hoil v'sofan lishtaber. Right. So the Gemara says, listen to what the answer was. Why isn't Tov included in the first set of Dibros? Because we both say the first luchos were broken. So we'll say, before we go on, now we're going to say actually what Rabbi Chia thought the question was, right? So watch what's happening over here. Rabbi Chanina goes over to Rabbi Chia and he says, why is it that the Torah doesn't use the word Tov in conjunction with the mitzvah to honor your parents in the first set of commandments, but does use the word Tov in conjunction with the same in the second set of commandments? It's clear from the answer that Rabbi Chia assumed that what he was asking was as follows. In the luchos that Moshe Rabbeinu brought down, in the luchos, was there Tov in the second one but not in the first? So in other words, did the luchos kind of mirror, the two sets of luchos mirror the two sets of commandments that we have in the Torah? Or perhaps were the luchos written in a different way? That was the question. It's not a question about what's written in the Chumash. It was a question about how the luchos were set up. So the Chumash has it that there's no Tov in the first set, in the first time the Aseres HaDibros are recorded in the Chumash, and it has Tov in the second time. What was it like by the luchos? What was it like by the... So in other words, let me say it differently, one more time. So the way that Rabbi Chanina asks the question was, why is it that Tov wasn't written in the first set of luchos, but was written in the second set of luchos? So Rabbi Chia says, oh, 1 second, I don't know that to be true. I just don't know that to be true. In other words, we all know how it's written in the Chumash, but you're presupposing that the way it's written in the Chumash was the way it was written in the Luchos as well. That the first set of Luchos didn't have Tov by honoring your parents, and ultimately, again, the second set of Luchos did. All Rabbi Chanina is saying, all Rabbi Chia is saying is, I don't know. I don't know how the luchos were written. So we'll say, so now the question makes a bit more sense. So we'll say, it's actually quite beautiful. So therefore, again, he comes to Rabbi Tanchum. Rabbi Tanchum says, listen, I never heard anything about this from Yehoshua ben Levi, but I did hear something about this from Shmuel Bar Nachum. Why is it? In fact, I will say this is the way that it was. The word tov, l'manyitav, so that it should be good for you, was not written in, that phrase was not written in the first luchos, but it was written in the second luchos. Why? It was incredible, I'll say. Hoil, b'sofan lishtaber. Because we'll say, since the first luchos were destined to be broken, so therefore, again, HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not want to include the word tov, good, in the first set of luchos. Isn't that incredible? Isn't that incredible? So the Gemara said, "V'chi sofan lishtaber my havi." I don't understand. So what? So what? So just because they're going to be destined to be broken, therefore again we don't write the word tov. The Gemara says, "Yeah, Amravashi chas v'shalom paska tova mi Yisrael." I will say this is so beautiful. Once the Ribono Shel Olam so conveys goodness, conveys tov to Klal Yisrael, the Ribono Shel Olam wants that to be an uninterrupted flow of goodness. So if the word tov, l'man yitav, it should be good for you, was included in the first tablets, in the first luchos, and those luchos were broken, that would have represented a disruption to the flow of tov. So instead, what happens? HaKadosh Baruch Hu omits tov from the first set of luchos, and then ultimately again leaves them out because destined to be broken, and puts tov in the second set of luchos, which again were permanent, representing an uninterrupted flow of goodness from the Ribono Shel Olam. I will say, is that not beautiful? Is it not magnificently beautiful? I will say it's also tremendous Musar Haskell. What this tells us, I will say, is that from the giving of the second set of luchos, there has been an uninterrupted flow of good from the Ribono Shel Olam. But you'll say, what about all the suffering? What about all the difficulties? What about the tragedies? So I will say, so remember again, Tov comes in different ways from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Like the pasuk says, Mi'ito lo teitzei hara. Nothing evil ever comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's always Tov. It's always good. Sometimes the Tov puts a smile on our face, and sometimes the Tov breaks our heart into 1,000,000 pieces. But every single thing that the Ribono Shel Olam does is always and only good. Gam Zulatova, when we say, right, the statement of Nachum Ish Gamzu, that this is also for the good. Gam Zulatova is not like the theological consolation prize when you have nothing else to say. So you just say, all right, this is also for the good. Gam Zulatova is the most powerful theological pillar upon which our people are built. The ability to believe and try to see the good and the beauty in every single situation. That's what the Gemara is saying over here. HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't put Tov in the first set of luchos, because if Tov were in the first set of luchos and then they're broken, and then there's a period without luchos, you might have thought that theologically there are moments in time where the goodness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu stops, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu would never want us to think that way. So what does he do? He omits it from the first, because the first there was a lapse, only puts it in the second. Rabbi say the second luchos are in existence to this very day, right? The Aron is hidden, the Ark is hidden. But Lamaisa, again, when Mashiach comes and we uncover the Aron, those same second set of luchos that came from Moshe Rabbeinu with the word Tov are still there. There is an uninterrupted flow of goodness from the Ribono Shel Olam each and every day, each and every moment of our personal and national existence. Sometimes it's clear, and sometimes it's difficult to see, but even if it's difficult to see, we believe with all of our hearts that there is an uninterrupted flow of tov, of good, from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to us. Incredible. I'm Rabbi Shmuel. Haru tes b'chalomo. If a person sees the word tes, the letter tes, right, literally the letter tes, in his dream, simin yafalo, that's a good sign. My time, what's the reason for that? So it says, tov, maybe because the word tov, right? So the word tov, right? The word letter tes represents the word tov, and ultimately, again, that's a good sign. Here's the problem. Ima v'tata seha b'ma'atate hashmein. I will say, here's the problem. The word tes also is used in a negative context. For example, over here, the Gemara quotes the pasuk from Yeshaya. V'tata, literally, again, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will sweep us away with destruction. So you see over here that the letter tes also means to sweep away with destruction. So how do you know that tes means good? Turis Gemara says, you're right. Chad tes kaminon. Now, say if you see two teses, then einachinami, that might make reference to this negative pasuk in Yeshaya. But one tes, you just literally see the letter tes in front of you in a dream, that stands for tov. That's great news. So the Gemara says, what about ema tumasa b'shulaha? So I will say a single tes could also refer to the pasuk in Eicha. Tumasa, literally again, the impurity is by the hem. So I will say, so once again, tumasa, maybe tes means tumasa, impurity. How do you know it means good? To which the Gemara says, tes beis kamrinon. So it means you don't just see tes, you see tes and a beis. So what's tes and a beis? Tov. The Gemara says, ema tavu ba'aretz sha'areha. Maybe not. So maybe tes beis is an abbreviation for tavu ba'aretz. Her walls sank into the ground. Once again, a reference to the destruction of Yerushalayim. Ela hoyelu pasach ba'akasav l'tov tchila. So I will say, watch this, the first use of the word tes in the Torah. What's the first use? Well, this is actually fascinating. Shemerishis ad vayara lo kimesa'ar lo kasiv tes. So I will say, here's what's fascinating. From the opening pasuk of Bereshis, ultimately again to the fourth pasuk of Bereshis, where it says vayara lo kimesa'ar ki tov. Listen to this interesting piece of information. The letter tes is not used. The first time the letter tes is used in the Torah, first time the letter tes comes up, is in Parak Aleph, Pasuk Dalet, chapter 1, verse 4 of Bereshis. Where is it used? Tov. Vayar Elokim Esa'ar ki tov. Hashem saw the light and it was good. So it's beautiful. So the first time the letter tes is used in the Torah is in the word tov. So because of that, if you see tes in a dream, that is a good omen. Ultimately, again, it represents tov. Beautiful. Rabbi Shmuel says, it was a great Gemara. Haroa hesped bechalomo. If you see a eulogy in your dream, chas alav mina shamayim upaduhu. That means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has had compassion on you and redeemed you from your troubles. The Gemara says, "V'hani mili biksava." Now this is not if you see a eulogy happening. This is if you see the word hesped. Right? You see the word hesped in your dream. Ultimately, again, that's a good siman. Why? So again, the Gemara understand that the word hesped is actually a contraction of two words. The hey and the ches are interchangeable. Chas HaKadosh Baruch Hu has had compassion upon you. Pad, Pidei, redeemed you from any difficulties and suffering. So I will say pretty incredible. So I'll just point out to you, I'll just read to you. The Marsha on this says, he says, Shahei b'makom aches, de'in chalom b'lo dvarim b'telim, v'az chas pad the kalahavin. So again, so this is interesting, by the way. So the Marsha says, why doesn't the Gemara just say, if you see the word chaspid, right? Chaspid, why haspid? So again, I will say the sugya of dreams is actually in Yomi, which sorry, not in Yomi, in Brachas. We happen to be learning Brachas in Yomi now. Baruch Hashem, 8:40 to 9 o'clock Mondays through Wednesdays, 7:40 to 8 on Thursdays. I will say which is fantastic. So the whole sugya of dreams is in Brachas. So there's a concept that I will say, just in general with dreams, there's a three-way mechlokes about how to view dreams. Right? School of thought number 1: dreams are meaningless. School of thought number 2: dreams are meaningful. And school of thought number 3, which is dreams are meaningful, but every dream has an element which is meaningless. So the Maharshal says over here, so the meaningless part over here is the hay, right? Really it should be a ches. So ultimately, again, if you see the word hesped, in a dream, that is a good omen. That means you were in danger, but chas, Baruch Hu had compassion upon you, and pad, he redeemed you. Incredible. I will say, I was thinking about this Gemara a lot. I think about this idea of seeing a hesped in a dream. So I'll say perhaps what it also means is like this. Who is a person who sees a eulogy? Let's just take the Gemara first of all at its literal understanding over here, right? If you see your eulogy in a dream, so remember again, dreams are not reality, right? Dreams are not reality. They're right. You see them, but it's not. So I'll say, what's the goal of life? The goal of life is to be the kind of person who has to see their eulogy in a dream, but that eulogy doesn't have to go ahead and be spoken out in real life. What do I mean by that? See, I will say, like a lot of times you go to a levaya, and you hear a hesped, you hear a eulogy about a person, like, oh, interesting, like, I never knew that. I will say the goal in life is to live the kind of life where your actions speak for themselves. That I don't need anyone to tell the world what I do or what I don't do, because who I am, what I stand for, the values I embody are manifest in the life that I led. In other words, I will say, someone should be able to write my obituary without having to do any level of research. They should be able to see the person I was, the midos I had, the character traits I had, the kind of person I was, the accomplishments I had. I don't mean all of us have things that we do that the world doesn't know about. But the idea is to cultivate it's like lahavdil. You know what the good sign of parenting is? The good sign of parenting? If your children could espouse your value system without you feeding them the lines. Right? Somebody stops your kid, say, what does your father believe in? What does he believe in life? Your child should be able to spew that easily without pause. Because those are the things that he or she is seeing from you each and every day. If they're like, I'm not sure, let me ask them, right? Let me ask them. And I will say, then I'm doing something wrong as a parent. Life, right? I shouldn't have to be able to, in other words, I shouldn't have to feed the lines. It should be manifest in the way that I live. That's the goal in life. The goal in life is to live a life where my value system is clear by just the actions I engage in, by how I spend my time, by what I do with myself. In life, what's the goal? Your hesped should be a chalam. No one should have to really speak out your eulogy, because your eulogy should be self-evident, based on the way that you lived. So the Gemara says over here, Hara hesped b'chalomo, if ultimately, again, you just see a eulogy in your dream. In other words, if your eulogy doesn't actually need to be spoken out, because it's clear who you were, how you lived, what you did, ultimately, again, that's a siman tov. That's an incredible omen for a life well lived. Halabai we should all be zocha. So the Gemara goes back to V'chein chayiv v'ov kiyotze. But so back to Mishnah. So remember again, the Mishnah said anything that has to do with an animal, anything that has to do with an animal, chay and ofer included as well. Amar Reish Lakish, kan shana Rebbe. So it's just some interesting halachas concerning animals. Kan shana Rebbe. Here, Rebbe spoke out the following idea: Tarnagol tavas upisyone. So this is interesting. A chicken, a peacock, and a partridge. Partridge and peacock. Right? Kilayim zebazeb. So we'll say even though these are all of the fowl family, they're kilayim. So there would be a prohibition to, like, say, mate, right? A chicken and a peacock, or a partridge and a peacock, or a chicken, any combination of those three. So the Gemara says, Pshita, isn't that obvious? Amar Rav Chaviv Mishum, the Rabbi Bahadadi Adadi. So we'll say, so ultimately, again, no, you would have thought that since they live together, right, since all of these foul species could coexist together, maybe they're not kilayim. In other words, maybe they're all considered to be part of the same foul cohort. So the Gemara says, Ma'od detema min chadu. I would have thought maybe it's one species. Kamash molam that they're not. Okay. Amar Shmuel. Shmuel says, Avaz v'avaz hawar kilayim zebazeh. So I'll say, so Rav says like this: a regular goose, right, and a wild goose are kilayim, even though they're both geese, right? Nevertheless, again, different species of geese, and therefore they're kilayim. Can't intermingle them. So Maskif Rava bar Rav Chanan, my time. What's the reason for that? So maybe because one has a longer beak, one has a shorter beak, is that what makes them distinct? So the Gemara says, Elamiata gamla parsa gamla tayo, the high olim kue, the high cotton kue. We'll say you have different types of camels, right? You have a Persian camel, an Arabian camel. One has a thicker neck, one has a thinner neck. Are you going to say, therefore, again, they're kilayim? So the Gemara says, and they're not. In other words, camels are camels. All right, it's an interesting fact. In other words, so we'll say, so one has the baits and one has the testicles hanging out, and one has them inside. Okay, so because of that major biological difference or anatomical difference, that ultimately again makes them different species. Rav Papa says furthermore again, furthermore again, I will say there's a pregnancy, a gestational difference, which is one only carries one egg at a time, and the other goes ahead and can carry multiple eggs at a time. Okay. So therefore I will say because they're distinct in these anatomical and gestational features, therefore they're considered to be different species, and therefore again they would be kilayim. So we'll say this is fascinating. So remember again, we know the concept of kilayim, which is you can't mate two different species together. Comes Rabbi Yirmiyah says in Rish Lakish, it doesn't just apply to species on land, it also applies to species in the sea. The prohibition of kilayim also applies to sea creatures. So you cannot go ahead and mate two different species of sea creatures. My time, what's the reason? Ultimately, I make a gzera shavav mineo ve'ameo from land creatures. Okay, so Rabbi say again, and that's halacha l'maisa. The prohibition of kilayim applies not only to land creatures, but also applies to sea creatures. So Rachba asks the following question: Hamanig bi'iza v'shibuta mahu. All right, so we'll say now the Gemara asks a hypothetical question, which again is not really possible, but just to illustrate a point. So we'll say, so what happens if I have a plow, and here's what I do. I hitch to my plow an ox and a fish. So if you can imagine for a moment again, so the plow itself is kind of straddling the sea coast border. So again, I've got my fish in the water and my ox on the land, but they're both hitched to the same plow, pulling the plow together. So Rabbi say, so what is that? Mahu. First of all, take a look at Rashi just a moment. Henig be'iza v'shibuta, karen kasher le'eiz v'dag zeh tzaf al hamayim zeh moshech imo asvas hayam. So the fish is pulling it, by the coastline, and ultimately again the ox is pulling it on the coast itself. So we'll say, so what's the halacha? Mahu. Mi amrina kevan de'iza lo nachas biyama v'shibuta lo salak liyabasha lo klomav. And on one hand we can say, look, the ox is not going into the water, and the fish is not coming onto land. So maybe because they're so distinct in their geographic areas, therefore again, it's not really considered to be as if, like, remember the whole concept of kilayim is like mixing things together. But since the land and the sea are so distinct, therefore aloha lamaisa again, it's not kilayim. Or on the other hand, On the other hand, right now they are both pulling the same plow, right? So Lamaisa again, maybe that is kilayim. So Ravina raised the kash. Listen to this. Alamiata chiber chita usora biyado v'zara chita ba'aretz usora b'chutz la'aretz. So now listen to this. Listen to this. Well, what happens if imagine you took a kernel of wheat and a kernel of barley? Now, both say, now remember again, planting wheat and barley together is kilayim, is intermingling species. But let's say here's what you did: you took them together, you planted them together, but the way they fell into the ground was that one kernel was in soil of Eretz Yisrael and one kernel was in soil of Chutz La'aretz. Right? In other words, they're planted together, but just the way they're planted right on the border. So the Gemara says, "Hachi nami d'mechayiv." Would you say that they're chayiv nabos? And I remember again, Rashi points out over here that the prohibition of kilayim, of intermingling species, is a din in Eretz Yisrael. Is a din in Eretz Yisrael, not in Chutz La'aretz. So Rabbi says, so what would happen over here if you did this with the wheat and the kernel? So I'm sorry, with the wheat and the barley, to which the Gemara says that's not a fair comparison. I'll tell you why. Amri, hachi hashta hasam eretz makom chiyuva, chutz la'aretz lo makom chiyuva. Now I will say that's not a fair comparison. Why is it not a fair comparison? As Rabbi say, the din of kilayim doesn't apply in chutz la'aretz. So because it doesn't apply in chutz la'aretz, that which you planted outside the land of Israel is inconsequential, irrelevant, and as if it doesn't exist. So Rabbi say, so for argument's sake, if you planted the wheat kernel in Eretz Yisrael and the barley in chutz la'aretz, halachically, the barley is viewed as if it doesn't exist as part of this equation over here. However, Rabbi say, hacha Idi v'idi chiyuvahu. However, again, remember as we just said before, the prohibition of kilayim does apply both where? On land and in the sea. So because that, the Gemara suggests, if you were to hitch a fish and an ox to the same yoke, that is kilayim. That is kilayim. So remember again, I will say, just want to point out, there's multiple different manifestations of the prohibition of kilayim. One of them is actually mating different species together. The other is hitching them to the same yoke. So over here, I just want to be clear, I'm not trying to mate an ox and a fish, right? What I'm doing is I'm putting them on the same yoke. So the shaila just is, since they're demarcated by such different geographic boundaries, maybe they're not considered to be mixed together. Kamash malan they are. Why? Because since the prohibition of kilayim applies both by land and on sea, therefore that is better. So Rabbi says, halacha l'maisa, you cannot plow your field with an ox and a fish hitched to the same plow. However, interestingly enough, if you were to plant barley and wheat together, any two species together, but one seed were to fall in one, it's in the same choretz, it's in the same furrow, so to speak, but one part of the furrow is in Chutz La'aretz, one part of the furrow is in Eretz Yisrael, that would not be kilayim. Interesting. All right, we'll say, Hadron alach, Shoshnaga chazapara, Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov. Nun Hamad Base 55. Yeah, we'll say brand new parak. Hakones Tson Lodir. We'll say a person goes ahead and puts his sheep in a pen, final b'fanakarai, and he closed the pen appropriately. In other words, we'll say he took the proper steps to safeguard the sheep. Safeguard the sheep. So what's halacha? V'yatza ve'zika. The sheep somehow gets out and does damage. Pater. Ultimately, the owner is pater. Why is the owner pater? This is really interesting. Why is the owner pater? Because I, as the owner, did what I had to safeguard the sheep. If somehow it gets out, that's no longer my fault. Remember again, reminiscent of what we just learned, that you have an obligation to go ahead and cover the bar, right? If you cover the bar and there's rottage that sets in, right, and now the cover is no longer good, what's the halacha? What's the halacha? I'm pater. In other words, halacha requires me to take the necessary steps, but once I take the necessary steps, if something goes wrong, I am not liable for that. I just want to point out, this stands in contradistinction to personal responsibility, which is interesting. Remember again, Adam Muad Li'olam says, you're always responsible for whatever you do. Right? When it comes to your own actions, I am fully and unequivocally responsible. On the other hand, halacha l'maisa, I have an obligation to safeguard my animal from doing damage. As long as I've taken the appropriate steps, then I am halachically exempt. If the animal subsequently gets out, not on me. Not on me. Okay. Lo nalva v'nakarai. But if you didn't go ahead and lock up the animal correctly or appropriately, the animal, someone got out, right? My sheep got out and ate Ruvain's produce, chayiv. Then ultimately, again, I'm going to be liable. Let's say I locked up my sheep, but somehow again the gate came crashing down at night, or listim, or thieves broke into my pen. And therefore, as a result, my sheep got out and did damage. Putter, once again, I'm putter. Well, it's the same idea. Because I've done what's on me. Now there's new extenuating circumstances that have been introduced. I'm not chayiv for that. Hotziu listim. That wasn't out. Okay, so that's first part of the Mishnah. First part of the Mishnah says, I did my responsibility for safeguarding my sheep, but somehow, again, it got out. Halacha l'maisa, I am not putter. Now watch this. Let's say my sheep was stolen. Sheep was stolen. Hotziu listim. So we'll say, so ultimately, again, if listim, robbers took my sheep, listim chayavin. So we'll say, here's what's interesting about a thief. A thief in halacha becomes a quasi-owner. So therefore, again, if the thief stole my sheep, he essentially takes on ownership liability. So if the thief steals the sheep and now the sheep goes ahead and damages Reuven's property, the thief is going to be chayiv for that. Hinicha b'chama. What's interesting? Let's say again, I left my sheep in the sun. In other words, apparently animals need shade. So let's say again, I left my animal out in the sun. Or I gave my animal over to a cherishot to the cotton. The and the animal got out and did damage. Chayiv. Now it's interesting that those two cases are grouped together. The idea is that if you leave the animal in the sun, it's going to go nuts, right? It's going to get very antsy, and engage in erratic behavior, get out and do damage. I'm responsible for that. I give it over ultimately again to a cherishot to the cotton. So therefore, there's no one responsible watching that animal. I am responsible for that. Next, so we'll say masra l'roa. If you give a sheep over to a shepherd, nichnas hara tachtav. It's interesting. The shepherd assumes responsibility ultimately for the flock, for the sheep. Nafla legina bananis. But say, what happens if my sheep fell? And it fell into Reuven's field, Reuven's garden, and ultimately again benefited. We'll discuss what that means. Mishalem is masharanis. It pays for what? I, the owner, pay for what? For what the animal benefited. Good. So the Gemara says, right, fine. Yarda kidarka. What happens if the animal didn't fall, but instead the animal went into Reuven's field, just walked in, v'zika, and ultimately again did damage? Mishalemes mashehezika. Ultimately, again, it pays for what it damaged. So I just want to point out over here, so you see two different payment models, right? If it falls into the garden and benefits, ultimately, again, I pay for what the animal benefited. If the animal goes in on its own volition and damages, I pay for what I damaged. Again, we'll discuss about the different mechanisms for evaluating damage. Keitzad mishalemes mashezika. So we'll say, what does it mean when we say you pay for what you damaged? Shaman beis sa'aba osa sada kama haisi yafa v'kama hi yafa. But we actually just had this a few days ago. How do you assess damages? So we'll say we don't look at the row of produce. Let's say again, my sheep walked into Reuven's field, ate a row of produce. So remember again, we don't assess the value of the row of produce by itself. Rather, what do? We compare. A field with this row of produce is worth X, and a field without this row of produce is worth X minus Y. That difference is damages. Rabbi Shimon says, Achla peiros kimurim. If my sheep ate fully mature produce, mishalemes peiros kimurim, then ultimately again I pay for the value of fully mature produce. Im sa'a, im sasayim. Whatever ultimately again my animal consumed, that's ultimately again what I am obligated to go ahead and pay. And I will say, what Rabbi Shimon seems to be saying, we'll see this in the Gemara a little bit more, but Rashi points out already is that what Rabbi Shimon is coming along and saying is, we assess, when an animal damages, we do assess the row of that produce. If it's fully mature produce, we assess the row of that, the value of that row on its own, right? Not in the context of the field on its own. Again, we'll see what the root of the machlokes is in a little bit. But what I just want to point out to you is we've seen this before. We see two different models for repayment. There's the concept of paying what you benefited from versus paying what you damaged. Two different types of benefit. If the animal falls into the field, I, the owner, am obligated to pay that which the animal benefited from. If the animal walks into the field of its own volition, ultimately, again, I'm obligated to pay damages. How do you assess damages? That's also a machlokes. Do we assess the value of the row by itself, or do we assess the value of the row as part of the field? Machlokes, again, we'll see all of this in the Gemara. Beautiful. But so there happens to be, if I have a little bit of time at the end, okay, fine. Let's go back there. So again, there happens to be a beautiful piece from the Pnei Moshe on this Mishnah, but we'll get a little bit right during the Gemara first. I think we're going to have time. Tarabanan. Here we go. Ezu karai, ezu shel karai. So we'll say, let's analyze this for just a moment. So the Mishnah says like this. When I have a sheep, I am obligated to safeguard that sheep, right? And I am obligated to go ahead and watch it or guard it kiroi, in the right, in an appropriate fashion. So the Gemara says, what does that mean? Eizuhu kiroi ve'ezu shelo kiroi. What's the definition of appropriate? What's the definition of inappropriate? To which the Gemara says, very simple. Dalas sheyachol lama b'ruach mitzuya zeu kiroi. She'enu yachol lama b'ruach mitzuya zeh shelo kiroi. So we'll say it's very simple. When guarding my sheep, I have to put it in a pen that has a door that is capable of withstanding a ruach mitzuya. Ruach mitzuya means a normal, everyday wind. That's kiroi. So we'll say, so this is actually very important. When I go ahead and I guard my animals, I am not obligated to ensure that my animals are guarded like against dramatic gale force winds, right? That the pen can withstand that. It just has to be able to withstand just a normal, everyday occurrence. So if it can withstand an everyday occurrence, that's kiroi, that's appropriate. Ultimately, again, if it can't, then that's eino kiroi. Or eino roi. So the Gemara says, Amar Ramani bar Patish, Man tana muad disagile b'shmir pechusa. So we'll say, see, here's what's interesting. Sorry. So the Gemara says like this: who is the opinion who holds that a muad ultimately again only needs a lower form of guarding? Now both say, now what's going on over here? Take a look at Rashi for just a moment. First Rashi in the Gemara. Man tana muad b'shmira pechusa sagila mani maslis damar tzon shezika b'shein. Now both say, what is the Mishnah talking about? Right? I have a sheep. Now what are we concerned about? That my sheep is going to get out and do what? Damage. What kind of damage? Eating is shame. But say, remember again, see, it's interesting to note that we're talking about a tzon, not a shar. But also remember again, b'pashtos, a tzon doesn't really do keren damage, right? Sheep do shein and regel. Now remember again, what's the fundamental distinction between keren slash shein and regel? What's the distinction? Remember, keren has tam and muad. Shein and regel, muad mitchila. Now you see something interesting from the Mishnah, which is, so therefore again, I have a sheep. My sheep is a muad, right? My sheep is a muad. It's a muad for shein and regel. Yet what do you see from the Mishnah? Even for a muad, all you need is what? Shmira pechusa, a basic guarding. Because what do we just say? What kind of guarding do you need for your sheep? Just the door, just the pen that could stand up beruach mitzuya. So we'll say, so you see from here that even for a muad animal, because remember again, every animal is muad for shein and regel. Every animal only needs a basic. We'll say, shmira pechusa sounds like a deficient guarding. It doesn't mean deficient. It just means a basic guarding. A minimal guarding. So who is the opinion who holds that even for a muad animal, all you need is a minimal guarding? So Rabbi Huda, this nan kashu by the if the owner tied up the animal with a rope, and closed the door in the appropriate way, the yatsa v'hizik, and the animal got out and did damage. Echad tam v'echad muad chayiv di Rabbi Meir. So I'll say, right, Rabbi Meir says that halacha l'maisa, you're chayiv. Apparently, Rabbi Meir holds that your animal requires a shmira ma'ula, right? A much more intense type of guarding. Rabbi Huda says, tam chayiv muat pater, Rabbi Yehuda says if the animal is a tam, this is interesting. If the animal is a tam, the tam requires a shmira me'ula, a higher level of guarding, but a muad, as long as you did a minimal act of guarding, what we call a shmira pechusa, ultimately, again, you've satisfied your obligation. I will say, now that sounds totally counterintuitive, but you're going to see why Rabbi Yehuda holds this way. It's not based on svara. It's based on a pasuk. Shene emar, v'lo yishmerenu ba'alav. Rabbi will say the Torah, when speaking about the muad, the way the Torah describes the muad is an animal who does damage. Why? Why? Because the owner didn't watch it. What can you infer from that? V'shamar huzeh, that if the owner did watch it, even what? Even a minimal amount of guarding, ultimately, again, the owner has discharged his obligation, and therefore is not chayav. So I will say, even though this sounds overwhelmingly counterintuitive, Rabbi Yehuda Shita is like this. By a tam, you're obligated for shmira me'ula. So by a tam, you're obligated again for a heightened level of guarding. So for example, I will say, remember, the only case where tam comes up is where? Karen. So what that means is if I have an ox, I am obligated to provide that ox with shmira me'ula, a heightened level of guarding so that it doesn't get out and do any type of damage. Yet, interestingly enough, by a muad, now remember again, that could be a shar that is muad for goring, or it could just be a regular sheep, which is muad for shein and regel. All I am obligated to do is a minimal guarding. And again, let's go full circle. What's the definition of minimal guarding? The type of structure that could withstand the ruach mitsuya, an everyday wind. Now, what's the logic of that? It's pasuk. Torah says by muad, definition of a muad, v'lo balav. The owner doesn't watch it. That tells me as long as I provide basic shmira, basic guarding, shmira pechusa, ultimately I've satisfied my obligations. Therefore, Rabbi say our Mishnah, which says that all you have to do is put the sheep in a minimal guarding that can stand up in ruach mitsuya. That's the Rabbi Yehuda. Beautiful. Rabbi Loza says ein lo shmir ela sakin. Rabbi Loza is famous sheet. Rabbi Loza says in general a muad can't guard a muad. What do you do with a muad? Rabbi say put it down. That's it. You shecht it. That's the only thing you could possibly do with a muad. So the Gemara says, "Afilu tema Rabbi Meir." It could even be Rabbi Meir. Why? Shiny shein v'regel da Torah miyata b'shmirasan. It will say our Mishnah could even reflect the view of Rabbi Meir. How so? Because halacha l'maisa, the Torah ultimately goes ahead and was memait, right? The Torah goes ahead and diminishes the obligation you have for their guarding. Even a shmira pechusa will work. Tana arba dvar Torah miyata b'shmiras. And I will say this is incredible. It's actually a great sugya. There are four things that the Torah diminished the threshold for guarding. In other words, four things the Torah said that you only have to provide a minimal amount of guarding, and you've satisfied your obligation. What are the four things? Ve'eluhein, bar, ve'esh, shein, v'regel. These are the four things, and if you provide minimal guarding for these four things, you're yotzin. I'm going to say, where do you see this from? So by bar we see bar d'chsiv ki yiftach ish bar o ki yichra ish bar v'lo yichasenu. The Torah says if you open a pit or you dig a pit and you don't cover it. What do you see from here? Hakiso pater. You see from here that if you just cover it, you're pater. Now what does that tell you? I would have thought the way it works is with bars like this. If you dig it, then what's your responsibility? Fill it back in. That would be shmira me'ula. But yet the Torah doesn't say that. What does the Torah say? You have to cover it. What does that show you? That all you need to do is provide for a shmira pechusa, a basic guarding, just putting a cover over it. Well said. Now going back to our previous sugya, even though I know that a cover is subject to what? Rottage. Let's use correct wording, please. Right? It's subject to rottage, right? So I see, even though, again, so you see from here that bar is only subject to shmir pechusa. We'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up in Meretz Hashem with the rest of this list in Meretz Hashem tomorrow. So four things. We're going to show how the Mishnah doesn't just have to reflect the view of Rabbi Yehuda, but maybe even reflects the view of Rabbi Meir as well. Tremendous shkayach, Chavosai. Milestone of finishing the parak. Incredible. Shkayach. Pnei Moshe, I know. Meretz Hashem tomorrow. It's a shorter, yeah. Sunday, Monday, that's right. All right, Chevron Zoom, have a great day, everyone.